I believe that we should be much more capable, much more athletic into later years than I think the average person thinks. How we are thinking can determine how much pain we feel. It can lead to changes in the immune system and how it functions. We have busy lives, and there's plenty of things that we could spend our time on that may provide us health benefits. The question is, which ones are going to give us that greatest bang for our buck? Welcome back, everyone. Today, I will be discussing what I call the 5 levers of health. That's movement, nutrition, sleep, psychology, and social connections. The goal of this video will be to, first of all, explain what I mean by leverage, which is why I call them the 5 levers of health, and explain how each of these 5 areas can be used to leverage our health span. If you're unfamiliar with the term health span, what we're talking about is, in contrast, lifespan means how many years will you live. Health span is how many of those years will you enjoy. So health span is lifespan plus quality of life, which I think is a very important distinction because a lot of times we get caught up on the number of how old somebody is, not really considering that maybe the last 10 to 15 years of their life are not very high quality. In future videos, I will go into greater depth of how each of these help us leverage our health and specific strategies to optimize for each of them. But today will be mainly focused on a brief overview of how each of these help us leverage our health. I think this is a very important discussion because just like in my previous video on health, where I discussed what is the actual definition of health and how many of us are unclear on this, I think a lot of times we assume things are good for us without really having a good understanding of what is the actual effect that this is having. So, what do I mean by leverage? Well, the simplest way to think about it is input versus output. And when we have good leverage, what that means is a smaller amount of input gives us a larger amount of output. And so the phrase that you'll often hear me use is bang for your buck, right? Not the most original. But we have busy lives, and there's plenty of things that we could spend our time on that may provide us health benefits. The question is, which ones are going to give us that greatest bang for our buck? Something that's also important to understand here is that these levers will function synergistically. What that means is that by improving one, you will actually improve the effectiveness of the other one. So, movement and exercise, for example, improves your sleep, it enhances your mood, and it might lead you to make better nutrition choices. Quality of sleep virtually improves everything: your mood, your willpower, your energy levels. Emotional well being improves our ability to make good decisions so that we can consistently improve our health over time. So, the point is, when we're talking about leverage, we're talking about how do I get the most out of the actions that I'm taking on a daily basis. So first, we'll discuss movement. You can kind of think of movement interchangeably with exercise, but I use movement specifically because it does actually include what I call non-exercise movements, like walking or low intensity hiking or playing with your children. Whereas exercise kind of always has this connotation of being at the gym doing a workout. So that's why I use the term movement to include all types of movement. So how does movement actually help us leverage our health? So the first and most obvious is our physical integrity, and along with that, injury prevention. So strength, athleticism, mobility, muscle mass, our fitness level, the literal physical foundation of our bodies as we go through life. I think that as a culture, we generally sell ourselves short on what expectations we have for how we should be able to move our bodies as we age. I believe that we should be much more capable, much more athletic into later years than I think the average person thinks. And if you look at other animals on this planet, you look at dogs, cats, lions, bears, whatever, they kind of all move the same. Not the same as each species, but within the species, a dog generally moves like a dog. With the caveat, we have some non-dog like dogs that we've bred. But for the most part, if you watch a retriever or a shepherd or a Rottweiler, you watch them run, they all have very similar characteristics in the way they move. If you watch lions in the wild, they all move very similar to other lions. But If we look at humans, we have such a wide array of dysfunctions that we've acquired over the course of essentially since agriculture started. We stopped moving out in the wild and we started to live in the same place, do repetitive labor, eat foods that aren't necessarily the best for our digestive systems and our health overall. So, what this tells us is that a lot of our problems stem from our environment, which is the case with all of the levers that we're going to talk about today. But what this means is we need to be particularly careful about how we spend our time and what we put our focus on. So, movement can also help with metabolic efficiency and energy regulation. It improves our insulin sensitivity, regulates blood sugar, improves fat metabolism, and generally improves our ability to utilize energy. Can also help with cognitive and mental resilience. Exercise is something that's stressful to our body. Now, in the right dose, it's a beneficial stress. It also works on a physiological level, for example, by boosting brain derived neurotrophic factor or BDNF, which is involved in neuroplasticity, the ability of our brain to learn new things, involved in memory and mood, etc. Movement can help lower stress hormones, leading to improved resilience to things like anxiety and depression. It's important to understand that with this and all the other levers we'll discuss, this is not an exhaustive list. This is just a general overview so you can start to get a sense of what you're getting when you put your focus and action into these levers. Okay, so let's move on to nutrition. Once again, we're getting help with metabolic efficiency and energy regulation. Quality nutrition optimizes blood sugar, insulin sensitivity, and mitochondrial function, preventing energy crashes and metabolic dysfunction, which is involved in things like diabetes and obesity, while also fueling our bodies effectively. Cellular health. The right nutrients help fuel cellular repair and reduce oxidative stress in our body. Poor nutrition accelerates cell damage, disease, and the aging process in general. Inflammation control and disease prevention. Nutrient dense foods help lower chronic inflammation, reducing the risk of cardiovascular disease, neurodegenerative disease, and autoimmune issues. Processed foods and poor nutrient dense foods tend to do the opposite. And lastly, gut health and immune function. This is an area that I personally am doing a deep dive into now. You may or may not be familiar with what's called the gut microbiome, which is the living organisms that we have in our gut. So there's both good and bad bacteria, and healthy gut and immune function rely on having a healthy amount of good bacteria in our gut. Gut health is involved in virtually everything at a physiological level in the body. It influences our digestion, our immune system, but also affects our mood and cognitive function as well. Moving on to sleep. Sleep is our body's general recovery tool. Virtually everything in our body goes into repair mode while we're sleeping. So while we're sleeping, we're improving cellular repair, so any damaged tissue in the body, for example, if you have an injury or something like that, but also something called autophagy, which is the breakdown of cells that aren't really working up to speed. So it will break them down and recycle them, reusing that material from the cell, but also our bodies are now not wasting energy to fuel cells that are not functioning at optimal efficiency. Sleep helps improve our immune system function and disease prevention overall. Sleep is also linked to lower rates of cardiovascular disease, neurodegenerative disease, and even cancer. Sleep helps with metabolism and hormone regulation. So, sleep helps control our insulin sensitivity, our hunger hormones, and cortisol levels. Sleep also helps with cognitive function and emotional resilience. Sleep is extremely important in consolidating memory, so taking what we've learned today and shifting it from short term into long term memory. So, it's very important for the learning process as well. Sleep is also important for the brain because it clears waste products in the brain through the glymphatic system with a G, which is essentially the lymphatic system of the brain. And if you need any more proof that sleep is important, think from an evolutionary perspective of how dangerous it is for us to sleep. We are allowing ourselves to become unconscious and unresponsive for roughly 1/3 of the time that we're alive. Think from just the standpoint of protection from predators, how risky it is for us to sleep. So evolution has obviously deemed this absolutely necessary for proper functioning. And virtually every animal on the planet has some form of sleep-like state at some point during the day. So now we're moving into the two levers that I think are a little bit less concrete than the previous ones. And we are now going to talk about psychology. Within psychology, we're talking about our mind state, our perceptions, our values, how we emotionally regulate. All of these are going to be considerations in the tools that we have at our exposure to use our mind to affect our health. So, emotional and cognitive optimization. So, having mental clarity, good emotional regulation, and general sense of self awareness is going to be extremely important for setting you up to make the right decisions at the right time throughout the day that will lead us to have better health over time. Our psychology can also help us with stress resilience and nervous system regulation. So, our psychology will actually contribute to how our bodies respond to the same stress. So, if you take stressful situations in your life as a challenge rather than being a victim of circumstance, it will actually change physiologically how your body responds to that stimulus. We also have a psychosomatic health, which is how does our mind affect our body? The mind body connection is a real thing. How we are thinking can determine how much pain we feel. It can lead to changes in the immune system and how it functions, and overall can impact our risk of disease. And lastly, we're going to discuss our social connections. Another example of one of the levers that is harder to determine exactly how it has a direct impact on our health. But if you don't think social connections are important, we literally punish the most antisocial people on the planet, the worst criminals that we have, by putting them in social isolation, right? Solitary confinement. So that's how important our social environment is to our overall health. So our community and our social connections are involved in our longevity and our disease prevention. When they look at the places in the world that have the longest life expectancy, one of the things that they find across all of them is a strong sense of community. Having good social connections is going to help with stress reduction and nervous system regulation. Most of you are probably familiar with oxytocin, which is known as the bonding hormone. It's also associated with feelings of pleasure and relaxation and a general calming sensation over the body. Also, mental and emotional well being. There's a great book called The Courage to Be Disliked. I can't remember the authors' names, as two Japanese authors. I highly recommend listening to it, the audiobook form, because the book is a theoretical conversation between a philosophy professor and a student. One of the things they discuss in the book is how we derive meaning in life from feeling like we are contributing to the communities that we're in. So if we're only focused on ourselves all the time, we're basically guaranteed to be miserable. But if we're focusing on what we can offer to the people around us, that tends to actually lead us to have the most fulfilling life. And since we are discussing health and our own individual health journeys, simply accountability is a good reason to have social connections. It's very hard to stay on track when it's just you day in and day out. But if you have people around that have expectations for you, that are excited about you making improvements, then remembering that those people are there and that they count on you to be responsible and take care of yourself, that can really help on those days where you kind of feel like slipping. So, as I mentioned previously, these are not exhaustive lists of the benefits that you get from putting focus on each of these five levers, but I think it's a good overview of why these things are important to focus on in your own life. So I really appreciate you taking the time to watch this video. As always, if you found it valuable, please consider subscribing to the channel. Either way, I hope you were able to take something of value away from this video, and I'll see you in the next one.